Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's a true honor for me to moderate this panel. You joined this conversation not because you want to talk about climate or innovation, no. You are here because you know that the reason of being for Europe is at stake. So to make sure that you are with us, I'm going to ask you a question and a little exercise. Please stand up if you believe that Europe, reason of being, is at risk. Please stand up. Thank you. And I want to make sure that every voice is heard. So now I'm going to ask the one that believe that it is a unique opportunity for Europe. Please stand up. Thank you. Well, guess what? In every great challenge lies great opportunities. We know that, right? I see nuts here. Well, today we grew up in a world where peace was a given, where cooperation and prosperity were part of the promises. But we know that today it is being challenged. The US is rewriting the rules of the trade. China is really good at exporting their industrial assets. So what is the role of Europe in all that? Guess what? If we don't act, we may be irrelevant in the next economy. Because we are believing today that setting standards will make us competitive. Well, guess what? It is not. So it's a unique wake-up call, and this is what our panel is about. So I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker, an incredible leader that we are very honored to have on stage. Because the question is not how we fail, but how do we go back up? This is the question for Europe, right? And as Ursula von der Leyen would say, this is a time to invest in our future, in green tech and innovation, and make Europe the home of it. So this is why we are here today, to explore how do we go back up, how do we invest, how do we de-risk innovation, how do we make sure that our voice is heard in this geopolitical fragmentation. Because hope is not a strategy. And today, sovereignty is about the choosing the future we want to build for Europe. So without further ado, let me introduce our first keynote speaker, someone who I deeply respect for his work, Pierre Haski, journalist and president of Reporters Without Frontiers. Pierre.
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know if you hear me well. Okay. When this building was inaugurated, it was for the World Exhibition of 1900. The President of the United States was named William McKinley. He's a hero of Donald Trump, as we all know, and he was a great fan of tariffs. So I don't know if that is a good or a bad omen for our meeting. All I know is that this is a great place, and I'm very happy to be with you today. In my job as editorialist in the morning program of the French public radio, France Inter, Donald Trump has been an obsessive figure since day one. Not only for me, but for most people I meet and who look for explanations or making sense of what's going on. On January 20th, the day of the inauguration of Donald Trump, I started my editorial with these words: "We are entering a new world today, literally." When I wrote that, I wasn't sure I was not exaggerating. But the next few weeks until today proved that this was indeed the case, for better or for worse. With this key question, what are we experiencing in the world today? And what does it mean for us in France, in Europe, or anywhere in the world? I usually point to a little noticed speech made on January 19, the day before the inauguration, by Marco Rubio, the now Secretary of State of the Trump administration. Rubio was that day in the Senate. He was for his confirmation hearing, and he made this statement. I quote Marco Rubio: "The post-war global order is not just obsolete, it's now a weapon used against us. And all this has led to a moment in which we now confront the single greatest risk of geopolitical instability and of generational global crisis in the lifetime of anyone alive and in this room today. 8 decades later, we are once again called to create a free world out of the chaos, and this will not be easy." End of quote, Marco Rubio, January 19. I think this statement says it all. The global order he was referring to was born out of the Second World War. It was shaped and led by the US and its allies, including Western Europe. It was getting increasingly questioned by a number of actors. Countries in the global south who were still under colonial rule when that order came out and are still underrepresented today. The UN Security Council is still representing the world of 1945, not the world of the 21st century. It's proved impossible to change as it requires a consensus. It's also opposed by China and Russia, two big powers who resent the US-led order that was created at that time, and they want to change it. But until recently, the US and its allies were defending that order. They were ready to accept minor changes, but nothing more than that. And here comes Donald Trump, who joins those who want to create a new world order, but with a twist. As Marco Rubio said on January 19, putting the US core national interests above all else. No more friends, no more allies, America first. This leaves Europe stunned and shocked. We are the village of Asterix of post-war global order. You know Asterix, this fictional character who has become our national symbol. He comes from a small village, which is the last one to resist the mighty Roman Empire. But the major difference between Asterix and Europe is that Asterix has a magic potion, which give him supernatural powers that the Romans can't match. Europe is still looking for the magic potion, and Trump knows this. This is a major challenge, but also an opportunity to Europe. I saw the way you voted at the beginning of this session. We mostly see, for the moment, the challenging part, not the opportunities. The challenging part, one, the fate of Ukraine, which hangs in the balance with a US administration that speaks the language of the invaders. Second, the collective security of the continent, which we have too long left in the hands of the United States through NATO, to find ourselves vulnerable and fragile when they turn their back on us. This is something we in France have some difficulty to understand. General de Gaulle has convinced us in France that the ultimate defense of the country is in the hands of our own president, who has the power with the nuclear deterrent. But this is a unique position in Europe. Other countries in the European Union don't have that capacity. Whether you are mighty Germany or small Lithuania, the ultimate defense of your country is in the hands of the President of the United States through NATO. And it makes a hell of a difference when that President is, to say the least, unpredictable. Thirdly, Europe finds itself under siege for its model. Digital regulation, cultural exception, climate policies, diversity and gender equality preferences, all these policy choices are under attack. French companies were shocked when they received a letter from the US Embassy in Paris soon after the change of administration, requesting them to comply with the Trump administration ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs if they still want contracts with the US government. Same for the so-called cultural exception. Hollywood and the digital platforms have asked the administration to protect them against European regulations. And the US administration has produced a memorandum promising to defend US companies against what they call discriminatory policies, particularly in Europe, of course. And yesterday, the US administration reacted to the EU imposing fines on Apple and Meta for not complying with EU regulations, and it described it as extortion. This announces a major battle. Vice President J.D. Vance of the US is close to Silicon Valley barons, and he is at the forefront of that battle. Climate is also obviously a major difference. President Trump is tearing apart any legacy from his predecessors, from exiting the Paris Agreement once again, for diminishing regulations to oil and gas exploration and production, drill, baby drill, you remember his opening speech, promoting coal and getting Elon Musk and his Doge to reduce dramatically all the departments involved in environment issues, even resorting to Orwellian methods of erasing databases and websites that refer to climate policies. Add to that pressures on foreign countries, particularly in Europe, to increase their consumption of US liquefied natural gas as part of the administration's trade wars. Europe is at a crossroads. I said earlier that it has challenges and opportunities. We've seen the challenges, now the opportunities. There are two distinct questions. One, what should Europe do? And secondly, more difficult, what can it achieve? I strongly believe that Europe has the capacity and the resources to overcome the onslaught on its model, but on conditions. First of all, let's recognize, as French sociologist Dominique Méda wrote in Le Monde recently, that, I quote, Europe has all of a sudden become a familiar, reassuring, and protective presence. This is very paradoxical, and we must thank Trump for that. For years, the EU has been decried. The UK even voted for Brexit. The rise of Eurosceptic or even anti-European parties was becoming the norm. All this has not disappeared overnight, of course. But pan-European polls show that a vast majority of Europeans today support the EU and certainly don't want it to disintegrate or even lose substance. On the contrary, on defense, for example, Europeans are even more integrationists as their leaders. A large majority is in favor of a European army, although there's no such proposal on the table. But what it means is that Europeans can get their act together and the European can come out of the current turmoil with a stronger sense of what it is, of what it was created for, and what it aspires to become over time. For that to happen, it certainly needs, first of all, to remain united. Since Trump started his assault on the EU, most European leaders have generally shown a high level of responsibility, more than I expected, to be honest, having followed EU affairs for decades. We even had the great surprise of hearing Friedrich Merz, the next German Chancellor, traditionally an ardent defender of the transatlantic relation, say on the night of his election that Germany should be independent, that's his word, from the United States. He even said he never thought he would say that one day. He'll become Chancellor in 10 days' time, and he announced that his first trips will be to Paris and Warsaw, the two countries of the Weimar Triangle with Germany. When we must add to that the United Kingdom, which has come out of the cold. Secondly, Europe will have to be smart. It's not ready to defend itself alone, and it will take, according to experts, up to 5 years to be able to defend itself without the United States, to have a real European defense. Therefore, it needs to prepare itself for the inevitable without making it happen too soon. Thirdly, and that's the most tricky part, it must defend its model. Otherwise, it will not be worth defending. We often use the word values. It's common in our policy speech by politicians or by everybody, journalists as well. But it's sometimes a mantra that has lost any substance. What are those values? And what new consensus can we build across the continent on what makes us Europeans? Judging by some of the postures of politicians in France or elsewhere, we're not yet there. We haven't even started yet, beyond the fact that we are not Trump's America. That's not good enough, even if it's a new beginning, as Trump is becoming an anti-model. This has not discouraged Europe's mini-Trumps from trying out, but I have the feeling that the US president is not helping them with his chaotic management. Europe can be a world leader if it offers an alternative to the strongman, authoritarian, jingoist leadership we see arising across the world, including in the US. This may sound counterintuitive, as the world hasn't reached yet the peak populism or peak authoritarianism in the world. But if you look beyond the current chaos, someone has to offer an alternative, and Europe could be that continent. Not alone. The EU should engage with other parts of the world to prepare the ground for a different world order, particularly countries from the global south who don't necessarily want to choose between Trump's hegemony or Chinese and Russian-led world orders. Trump allows us to break away from the West versus the rest mentality, which was threatening to isolate us, not them. This is a cultural revolution for many Europeans who have been raised with US-centric world and will find it difficult to make too big a change. But without a new paradigm in relations with Africa or Latin America, Europe will not be able to be heard. But for that to happen, Europe must defend some of its achievements. As president of Reporters Without Borders, I see European nations, particularly the Nordic ones, come out every year on top of the World Freedom Index that we publish. The next one comes out next week and should confirm that trend. But it should also confirm the increasing worries we have about the quality of those freedoms, about the respect for the rule of law, the separation of power, the accountability. We cannot be complacent or take comfort from the fact that it's worse elsewhere. And Europe should remain focused on climate issues in the world that is going back on all its commitments. 10 years ago, the Paris Climate Agreement was an achievement of diplomacy and civil society advocacy. But the decade since then has been dramatically disappointing. The EU has produced its own Green Deal with objectives that are more advanced than most of the world, but we shouldn't be satisfied with this relative advantage. And there are many dangerous clouds at present that take advantage of what is going on in the US, with the US backtracking on every commitment, to push for the same to happen here, for competitiveness or under the pretext of fighting bureaucracy. A few years ago, at our radio, we received a call from some French experts on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They wanted to talk to us urgently. They could not understand how the media had made front-page headlines on their most recent report, which was predicting a climate disaster unless strong measures were taken urgently. And then the world went on with business as usual the next day. They told us they could not sleep at night. We discussed with them to improve our information system on climate issues. But looking at the world today, particularly with climate skeptics now in power in Washington, I don't think they have recovered sleep. That's where Europe should make a difference. Can it? It's a huge question mark. And I think civil societies should be active actors to keep our governments and companies focused on these existential issues. Europe can recover its long-lost leadership if it shows it can become a power that makes itself respected and its citizens protected, but also reinvent its democratic and social model and remain committed to saving the planet. This is a huge agenda. But in the global chaos of the world, it's not enough to survive. It's also necessary to give citizens reasons to hope and struggle for. In a time of conflicting empires, we'll become adults or vassals. Thank you.